All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Medical School Application Deep Dive Workshop. We're going to get started here in just a short moment. Please grab that QR code that you see on the screen and sign in. The QR code has some additional questions. If you could fill that out, that would really help us better understand who is attending our workshops and how we can better support different populations of students on campus. So I'll give you a second to fill that out and then we'll get started. All right, and for those that just joined the room, please grab that QR code and sign in. We'll get started here in just a short moment. All right. So for this workshop, we will be covering a lot of detailed information about the medical school application. So first and second years, if you are in the room, you are welcome to stay, but just know that this information might make a little bit more sense as you're getting closer to applying. For juniors and seniors in the room, just know that this information is pretty detailed and it's okay to feel overwhelmed by the information. The conversation isn't going to end after today. You're welcome to email us with any follow-up questions, schedule an appointment with us as well. And just so you know, this webinar will be recorded, so you are welcome to watch that recording and go back and clarify any information that was confusing or that you missed. Yeah. All right. And again, my name is Sonia Gordillo. I use she, her, and ella pronouns, and I am one of the pre-health advisors here in Tykeson College and Career Advising. And I'm going to let Amanda introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Kong, also she, her pronouns, and I'm the other pre-health advisor in Tykeson. Great to see y'all. Okay, so today our agenda is basically to do a deep dive of the two centralized application services. So for MD degrees, that's going to be the AMCAS portal. And for DO degrees, that's going to be the ACCOMAS portal. We're going to go through the application timeline. We're going to talk a little bit about how much applying costs and where you can get financial support if you need it, as well as go over any other resources and kind of where do you go from here. So as you can see, this workshop is really geared towards if you're applying, this cycle or next cycle, right? We will not be covering the Texas Medical School app. It's a pretty low chance that you'll get admitted if you're not already from Texas. If you are from Texas and do plan to apply to Texas medical schools, know that the application will look pretty similar to this. And, please come and make an appointment with us for any support that you need with that application portal. It's just so specialized that we're not going to take the time to cover it today, right? We will be doing Q&A at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to submit your questions and comments through the chat. We will be answering, through the chat. We'll also pick, if there are clarifying questions, we'll go through them as the presentation progresses. And then we're going to pick kind of the most common questions at the end to talk about. And then the rest of the questions we will be posting to our Canvas page as a discussion board and answering them there. So as Sonia said, the conversation will continue. There are a variety of formats where it can happen. So you will get your question answered no matter what.
All right, we're going to start off by going over the application timeline for medical school. So that's the MD, DO, and the Texas Medical School application. So the application opens in May. That is the primary application portal. And we suggest applying as soon as you can, as medical school is rolling admissions. And you want to be sure that you are at the front of that line. So generally speaking, you want to be applying sometime between May and mid to late June, ideally, so that your application can be processed for verification and you can start to get secondaries. So secondaries is the phase between interviews and that primary application. That is when you're going to be invited from the schools that you have applied to submit additional questions. And these questions can be related to why are you interested in that program? Maybe they want to dig a little bit deeper about your healthcare related experiences, teamwork and collaboration experiences, etc. So that is the secondary phase, and that typically happens between the months of July through, let's say like end of September, early October at the very latest. So if you're applying to 20 schools, it's possible to hear back from all 20 schools for secondary essays. And as soon as you submit that first secondary, you're in the waiting game for interviews. So interviews happen as early as mid-August and run through the following year through the month of March. Okay. So it's possible to be invited to an interview pretty early on in that cycle or to be waiting for some time. So with that being said, I do highly recommend checking your junk mail folder or the spam folder, because it's possible that an invitation that was sent to you could fall into those folders, and you don't want to lose out on your opportunity to schedule an interview. All right. Oh yeah, and then the other thing I wanted to mention was about the admissions decisions. So admissions decisions, those happen as early as October and then all through the following year. So you can be admitted to medical school pretty early on in that cycle, or you could be either hold or waitlisted. If you're on hold, that means that a school hasn't decided whether they want to admit, waitlist, or deny you. They want to interview other candidates before they make a decision, but they do want to be in communication with you. So it's possible that you're going to get that response. If you're waitlisted, it's still possible to get admitted into a program. There are many programs that move hundreds, like between 50 to 150 students off of the waitlist into the program. And they'll tell you what position you are on that waitlist, and you can see how you're moving up. All right, so here's another snapshot of that timeline. So this is a snapshot of what it would possibly look like if you're thinking about applying straight from undergrad into medical school. So the application opens in May. That means that you're going to be working on your application sometime between in the summer between your junior and your senior year. But you're going to want to start working on your application even before that. So maybe in the fall of your junior year, you're thinking about your MCAT prep planning. And in the winter, you're actually prepping for the MCAT and then taking the MCAT sometime between winter and spring term. In addition to that, you're also thinking about writing your letters of recommendation, thinking about your, personal statement, thinking about your letters of recommendation requests and actively making those requests. And also thinking about your activity section where you have to write a small blurb of your experiences. And so in addition to that, there is also the preview and the CASPER exam that some programs require. Not all medical programs require that. If you're not familiar with preview and CASPER, we are going to talk about that a little bit today. So you'll have some information after today. And then in the summer, that is when you're actually submitting your primary application and then transitioning quickly to working on your secondaries. And then, of course, that senior year, you're interviewing, and interviews can happen both in person or remotely. I would say the majority of programs are still doing remote interviews, which is nice. It's a really great way to save on money. But if you are going to do an in-person interview, then that takes time away from your academics and you have to be in close communication with your instructors. So again, this is what it could look like if you're doing a no gap year, but you can, of course, move this timeline down and do an application year or a true gap year to allow yourself a little bit more time to do that MCAT prep and to work on the different parts of your application. All right, so here are some important dates. So for the MD application AMCAS, that application opens May 1st, and then the first day that you can submit that application is May 28th. So between May 1st and May 28th, you're going to be filling out that background information section. You're going to be inputting that information for your letter writers, etc. And between, let's say you submit your application on May 28th, medical schools are not going to receive your application until at minimum June 28th. So that date is a little bit confusing. It's called the transmission date. So if your application is verified before June 28th, it's actually just sitting there. Schools aren't going to receive that data until the 28th. So that gives you a little bit more time to be working on your application. I always recommend students to prioritize the quality of your application over the timeline. If you need to give yourself an additional week or two so that you can submit a quality application, please do that. It takes about 2 to 6 weeks for your application to be verified. But of course, you want to make sure that you're submitting a quality application. So for the ACCOMAS application, that is if you're applying to DO schools, that application opens early May. They haven't posted their dates for this upcoming 2024-2025 cycle, but I would envision that it's going to be on or around that date. And so they don't have an opening date and a submission date. It's all the same. So the moment that you start that application and add schools to your application, schools are going to receive that data and are going to start to send you some promotion about their program. So just be aware about that if you're applying to DO schools. And then the Texas medical school application, this is pretty standardized for every year. Their application opens May 1st. May 15th is the first day of submission. And then if you're doing the early decision program, then you can, that deadline would be August 1st. And then the program deadline would be November 1st for that. All right, I'm going to pause. Any questions? Okay.
All right. So aside from, just all of the stuff that's happening in your primary application, right, we want to think about how to get, what needs to be done by the time we start the application and what can kind of be done, right, as you're getting closer to submission. What are the things that are okay, if they're a little bit late, right? So we're really thinking about kind of prioritizing certain parts of your application first, right? So for example, if you're thinking about applying this cycle, right, you should really have done some healthcare related experiences, right? You should have your shadowing done, any direct patient care hours, volunteering, right? You want to have some of that done so that you can talk about those experiences in your application materials, right? You've already, joined clubs and had, leadership or research positions, right? You should have also explored programs by going to their open houses, their info sessions, health grad school fairs, right? Or be thinking at least about which programs you're going to prioritize applying to, because that will be the moment, right? Again, to make sure that none of your programs have any weird outline prerequisites, right? You want to know whether or not they want you to do Casper preview, right? Because those things can be variable between programs. So that's kind of the last moment to make sure that you've got everything ready and that you're eligible to apply to the programs that you want to apply to, right? Nothing sucks more than thinking that you're ready and then going and seeing that you're missing like one requirement and therefore you can't apply to that program at all, right? It happens all the time and it's always sad. So the more that you can kind of prepare ahead of time and know exactly where you want to go and what they want for their application, the easier and least stressful this process will be for you. However, you don't have to have your exams done before you apply, right? You can be kind of working on them as you develop the rest of your materials. So, for example, if you are applying right in June, we're thinking about, doing your MCAT, Casper, and previews, right? Anytime between kind of January and April, May, right? May might be like a little bit late, but if you're really, really confident, we can do it, right? That's definitely a possibility. You definitely need to make sure you've got all your prereqs done, right? All of these things. And also that you're developing a plan for requesting letters of recommendation and either have already made those requests or, know who you're going to ask. And sometimes, right, those letters of recommendation can come from places other than your academic sources, right? So yes, you're definitely going to want to get some of your professors in on the mix, but you're probably also going to want to have a professional letter of recommendation, either from someone who's worked with you, has managed you, or is a professional in the field, right? A letter of rec from a physician or a DO can really go a long way, especially if you've been doing the work and putting in the time and really developing this kind of relationship with them, right? And that brings us to this slide, which are, what are the other ways to enhance your application, right? So literally what I just said, right? Developing that relationship with physicians in your area or in the areas of specialty that you want to specialize in the future. You can do that through informational interviews or shadowing, right? And I really hype up the informational interviews and the shadowing because at the end of those experiences, you can always ask that physician, like, hey, do you know anybody else who might be willing to let me shadow or let me interview them so I can see more about this profession and what it's like? That's going to lead to more and more and more opportunities, right? So that's a really great way to kind of build your professional network and also ensure that therefore you have like a variety of people that you can kind of ask for advice, right? Now, as for leadership experiences, right, obviously joining a campus club would be great. Doing volunteer work. We've got the Holden Center here on campus that's at the bottom of the EMU. Doing all of that is really great. It often, puts you out of your comfort zone and gives you a lot of great experiences to talk about in your personal statement and during your interview process, right? Of course, research and paid work experience are great. These are things where it's like, it's always a plus if you have them, but it's not a negative if you don't, right? We have seen people get in without research or without having a job, right? But if you have them and want to pursue them, always going to be a great idea. And then international experience, right? Or at least experience with groups and cultures that are kind of outside of what you know, right? As a physician, you're going to be called upon to attend to and help, many different kinds of populations, right? So getting some of that experience and knowing how to be kind of sensitive and respectful of cultures outside of your own is a huge bonus. And again, something that you really want to talk about in your personal statement and your interview. Being a doctor is not just about the science part, right? It's also about the part where you're relating to your patients, you're making them feel comfortable and building a sense of trust and also educating them, right? So we really want you to think kind of flexibly about your experience. I promise you that almost everything you've ever done is going to be really great for med school apps, even if you don't think so, right? And that's part of our job, right? Is to help you translate and find those kinds of experiences that make you a unique candidate.
We did have a good question in the chat. So somebody asked, on average, how many healthcare hours do medical schools want in a student?
Yeah, so this, is very variable. It's one of those things that we really want you to do your research and find out. But I would say healthcare related hours can kind of vary. It could be anywhere from like 25 to 200, right? But sometimes they also have options that are like non-healthcare related hours, right? So again, it's really going to depend on each school. You're going to want to spend some time looking at the admissions requirements for the schools that you're really interested in to see how much you have to do. Probably a really good safe number though is like 50. I see that one like kind of commonly a lot of the time.
Yeah, and what I would like to add to that is that medical schools are going to do a holistic review of your application. So I think that's the foundation of what Amanda's talking about here. And in terms of how many hours on average, I like to encourage students to think more about the quality of their healthcare related experiences, because you're going to be asked to talk about those experiences, and they want to make sure that you know the ins and outs of healthcare and that you know what you're getting yourself into. So a good question to ask yourself is exactly that. Do I feel like I know what the healthcare world looks like? That I know what I'm going to be stepping into in my role as a physician? It might be helpful to even look at some secondary essay questions that you're going to be asked, or maybe some interview questions, to see if you feel like you have a quality response to that.
Mm-hmm. And also, when we say know what you're getting into, that also means knowing what like the worst part of the job is, right? So it's not just kind of celebrating the like cool parts of the job, right? It's also knowing what are the main issues that you're going to face, and do you want to face those issues, right? Are those problems that you want to tackle? What's the worst part about the job? Are you okay with that? Okay, so here we have a screenshot of the AMCAS instruction manual. This thing will be your best friend. It is so great. It gives you pretty clear instructions. Don't overthink them. If they're ambiguous, it's for a reason. It's because they want to leave it open for you to be able to answer it in a variety of different ways, right? So if a question is ambiguous, it's because they want to give you room to answer it however you think is best, right? They want to be surprised by the kind of answers that they see, right? And if you're unsure, right, you can always contact AMCAS directly, or make an appointment with us to talk about it. I will say that the customer service reps for these portals are pretty great. And also the, sort of like troubleshooting pages and FAQ pages are really robust. People are here to help you out no matter how, stupid you think your question might be. So if you are confused at all, it is always better to reach out and get an answer than to just kind of like go forward and make a decision without really knowing, why you're checking this box or what you're doing, right? Okay, so for DO, right, the ACCOMAS Help Center, they don't have a manual, but they do have like a quick start guide, and they have this help center, which again, like I said, contains all of the kind of troubleshooting guides, FAQs, right? Most common kind of issues that you might run into, and of course, instructions about how to get in touch with somebody if you do need that kind of personal help.
All right, and here is what the actual AMCAS application looks like. So as you can see over on the left-hand side, there are many different categories that you're going to be filling out. So there's that identifying information section with many subsections underneath that, schools attended, biographic information, etc. There are many subsections within each one of those categories, so it's pretty busy work to be filling out this application. And that is also true for the ACCOMAS application. It looks slightly different. There are 4 different boxes there. And then within those boxes, you're going to get into those categories and then subcategories within that. So when you go to fill out your application, just know that there's going to be some parts that you're going to want to prioritize to fill out first, and we'll be talking about that here in the next few slides. But alongside that, there's going to be some important things that we want to make sure that we're highlighting for you so that you can be prepared for those sections, because there are some sections that are a little bit more confusing than others. So one of those is the school's attended sections. You'll want to request an official transcript from all of the colleges and universities that you have received credit for. So you're going to request one from the University of Oregon, but that's not going to include your transfer credits. So you'll want to request one from LCC if you have credit there, or PCC or PSU, etc. I would recommend requesting an official transcript for yourself, because what's going to happen is that you're going to go into your centralized application portal and you're going to fill out your academic history in order of when you took those courses for every single one of those colleges that you have credits at. So AMCAS and ACCOMAS, they're going to open up that official transcript that you send to them, and they're going to check that information line by line to make sure that you inputted that information correctly. In addition to that, in the schools attended section, you're going to list your major. It doesn't organize it by the majors that are offered at the university that you selected. It is a list of general majors across the nation. And so select a major that closely aligns with the major that you currently have, even if it's not the exact name. And then if none of those really resonate with you, then you're welcome to select other major, and that's perfectly fine. And you'll also have the opportunity to select a minor. All right, there's going to be a part in the application where they're going to ask you to if pre-health advisors have authority to your application. I would encourage you to mark yes if you could. This allows us to know that you are applying to medical school, and we can send you targeted outreach to offer you some additional support. It also helps us track data. The university regularly asks us how many students applied and got into medical school, PT school, etc. And so we'll be pulling that data and sharing that out to our campus colleagues. I know all of you work with many faculty and departments, and they also want to see you be successful in the application and are excited to see those numbers as well. So we're always excited to share that as well. And then, yeah, okay. So next section, requesting an official transcript, and I believe Amanda's going to take that over.
Yeah, so as Sonia said, you do want to request official transcripts to be sent from every single college you've ever went to, right? And she did a great job going over that. And so there is a process, right? One, you need certain kinds of information. So do not create a transcript request form through AMCAS, right? But do make note of your transcript ID, right? Where are you going to find that? So if you go to your AMCAS ID, which is located under, the tab My AAMC Profile. If you have AP or IB or CLEP credit, right? So the kind of more high school era classes that you got credit for, but did contribute towards your degree here at UO in some way, right? You're going to need to request an addendum with your UO transcript, right? Basically, there's a little form that you're going to fill out, and it has a spot to put like an attachment, right? You see that right here at the bottom right? Add an attachment. You're just going to fill out like a little Word form that says, I need an addendum for my AP or IB or CLEP credit, right? Whatever one you have. Just one sentence. You're going to save it, you're going to attach it, and send it off to the records office, right? They're going to see that, and they're going to know what you want, and then they're going to send that to you, and also to AMCAS or ACCOMAS, wherever you're having your official transcript sent, right? Okay, so as Sonia said, be sure to request an official transcript for yourself and the addendum, right? Again, you want to see what you're going to be entering, right? And you want to make sure that they match. And this is all throughout the academic history section, right? Okay. And then the next kind of step will be in the application process, will be sending those letter of recommendation invitations to your letter writers. I do want to make it clear that throughout this application, there are going to be places where you can kind of like skip ahead, but also like go back. You know what I mean? It's like many college applications, right? Where it has those options to kind of save where you are in the portal, right? And return to those screens. So you can skip ahead through all of this and send your LOR invitations, the first thing, right? And then go back and fill out this information as well. Okay, we've got a question in the chat. If the AP and or transfer credits show on the UO transcript, do we need to request the other transcripts where those credits came from? Yes, you do. You need to request those transcripts from the original institutions, or as I said here, you're going to want to get an addendum if you have that AP credit from our office.
Yeah, and to clarify there, your official transcript doesn't include the transfer credit. And then your official transcript doesn't include your AP credit. So if you have AP credit for bio 211, 212, 213, etc., those are prerequisites for medical school. And therefore, it's important that they see that you have college credit for that. And so that's why you need to request an addendum so that the registrar's office can exactly input in that official transcript. This student received 4 credits for bio 211, 212. Otherwise, they're just going to see AP credit at the top, 12 credits. They're not going to see that you got those credits for biology or mathematics. And so it's important that they know that you have completed those prerequisites at an undergraduate level and that the University of Oregon awarded you that. So transfer credit, that's credit that you received at another institution. So you need to request an official transcript from them.
If we send AP credits to UO, but it wasn't applied to major prereqs, do we still need to? I would say yes. It's just better to be transparent about your history overall. And there's no danger in doing so, right? There's a danger in leaving it out, but there's never a danger in disclosing everything. So yes, send it. Other questions about transcripts? Okay, well, if you've got more questions, put them in the chat. We'll answer them as we go on. So the next part of the kind of academic history section, right, is the section on institutional action. It's scary-ish, right? So one, we're talking about specific kinds of institutional action here, right? So for example, if you lost a scholarship or, something weird happened with housing or financial aid or whatever, right? We are not talking about those situations. If you were on probation from the Clark Honors College, or you were deciding whether or not you were dropping out of the Clark Honors College and not doing so hot, right? Again, we're not talking about that kind of stuff. What we are talking about here is very specifically not meeting university standards, right? So overall university standards. And this is basically related to things like academic warning and probation, right? So if you have less than a 2.0 term or cumulative GPA, and you've been on academic warning or you've been on P1 or P2, right? That's what we are talking about. If you've had a conduct violation, right? So anything from like cheating to harassment, although this is very, very rare, but if one of those situations has happened or some kind of investigation occurred, right, we want to disclose that. You get an extra character space to talk about this, right? And again, it's not going to like completely tank your application, because of course, who knows, like we don't know what could have happened, right? We don't know why that happened to you. We don't know how you reacted afterwards, right? So it could be a great chance to kind of show and display your like emotional maturity and growth, right? Maybe you were in a bad situation, you lashed out, you made a mistake, but this is how you moved on. This is how you've made it, fixed it, made amends, bounced back, right? So you want to focus on what you learned, again, how your character grew, right? And how that not only contributes to the person that you are today, but kind of the physician that you want to be, right? Okay. All right, so then the next section is again all the biographic information, right? So your addresses, citizenship, right? Race, ethnicity, all of this stuff. Felony, misdemeanors, again, pretty rare, but if you've got those on your record, you should disclose them, right? The main theme of the game is honesty. You want to be honest about everything that you've been through and that you've done, both good and bad. When you are admitted, you will go through a background check. So if you do have any of these things in your record, right, it is going to come up. Again, it's best to talk about it first, right, to kind of get ahead of their perceptions, right? Because if somebody is just kind of seeing that on your record without any contextualization from you, they might assume the worst thing, right? When it might be very different from your situation, right? So be honest, disclose what happened. Schools want to see you be transparent. They want to see you own your mistakes, and they want to see you grow from your mistakes, right? Um, so oh yeah, and part of the section is also other impactful experiences. Now, this is a weird section because it seems very vague and you're not quite sure maybe what they're asking. So one, it is an opportunity to talk about diversity stuff, right? So if you've had major, concrete barriers to getting resources in your life, whether those have been due to race, financial background, immigration status, right? Whatever the case may be, right? This is the moment to talk about it. The language is intentionally very vague because, of course, they want to acknowledge that like barriers to access don't just happen for these groups of people, right? It could happen to anyone due to their unique situation. So again, if you had trouble, accessing some kind of resource, if you had to spend your time, during your undergrad working because your family couldn't, afford everything for your college career, right? All of those kinds of experiences, again, contribute to who you are as a person, contribute to your understanding of our society and of other people, right? So we do want to disclose that. We want to talk about those things. And it's always better to kind of overshare. You never really know how schools are going to use this information. Sometimes they use this to make you eligible for scholarships. And they can't do that if they don't know that you've had this kind of experience, right? So it's always kind of erring on the side of like putting something rather than putting nothing.
All right, we're going to transition to talk about course entry. So this tends to be the area in which students have the most questions about in their application. So again, you're going to go in and request an official transcript to be sent to AMCAS and ACCOMAS, and then you're going to request one for yourself, and that's going to help you fill out this course entry section. I highly recommend watching the videos that are provided to you within the portal. This is going to help answer the majority of your questions on how to fill out this portal. If it's still confusing, of course, feel free to reach out to us or to AMCAS and ACCOMAS directly. The course entry section, you will need to add every course you have ever taken in order. And so in addition to that, so you can see right here, there's a screenshot of a first term. And if you have any AP credit, then you'll want to list that within your first term. And in addition to that, you're going to categorize the course. So this is going to help determine your BCPM GPA. So BCPM is essentially your science GPA. It stands for biology, chemistry, physics, mathematics. Okay, in the next slide, I'll show you the list of categorization so you have an idea of what we're looking at. But another thing to note is that the years in which the years in which they use for each academic standing is a little bit different than the University of Oregon, because at U of O, freshman is fall through summer. But in AMCAS and ACCOMAS, it starts summer through spring. So if you took a course summer between your freshman and your sophomore year, you're going to list that summer as your sophomore year, not your freshman year. So I know that can be a little bit confusing, but just be careful about that as you're inputting your academic history. So here's a snapshot of what it looks like when you're inputting that academic history. So you're going to put in the academic year, the term, you'll put in the course number and the course name, and there's that course classification section. And then beneath that, you'll note whether it was a lecture only, lab only, or combined. So be sure that you're accurate there, because programs, specifically for those science courses that they require labs, if it's combined, you want to make sure you're marking that. So I'm thinking about that biology sequence where it's 4 or 5 credits, depending on when you took it. The lab is embedded within the course. So you want to make sure you're hitting combined. And then those bottom sections there, if it was a pass fail course, I'm thinking about like research credit, you'll want to select that. advanced placement. If you're inputting your AP credit, make sure to select that. So make sure that you're being as accurate as possible there. Here is the course classification list. So it's organized by biology, behavioral and social sciences. There's a computer science section, foreign languages, other, special studies. Notice that anatomy and physiology, that is under the biology section. So if you took anatomy and physiology, it's not a prerequisite to be admitted into medical school, but it's going to be categorized as a biology course. So that is going to be accounted for in your science GPA when you go to apply to medical school. For Clark Honors College courses, be sure to classify it based off of the content of the course. And that is translatable to any course you have taken at the University of Oregon, whether you're Clark Honors College or not. So an example of that is taking Psychology 304. That is biopsychology. You can categorize that as a biology course. Again, they're basing it off the content of the course, not the title or the subject of the course. And so you get to decide how that is categorized. So that can help kind of boost up that science GPA if you got a good grade in Psych 304 and you want to use that towards your sciences. And so think about that as you're filling it out if you took psychology courses or even some of those upper division anthropology courses. All right, any questions about that? All right, so for ACCOMAS, the only addition to, inputting all of your academic history is that you're gonna verify the prerequisites that match with that program. So in the program materials section, that's where you have the list of all of the programs that you're interested in applying to. You're gonna select one of those programs. There at the top, you can see home, questions, prerequisites. So you'll hit prerequisites. And then once you fill out that academic history section, you'll select which course meets their prerequisites because they want to make sure that you have either taken it or have a plan to take it. So there is that additional work you'll need to do there.
Yeah, so next part is going to be uploading your personal statement, right? So one really important feature of the personal statement is one, that it is a character count, not a word count. So for both AMCAS and ACCOMAS, they want 5,300 characters, right? That means including punctuation marks and spaces. Okay, so that's pretty tough. Easiest way, of course, to do this is to open up your personal statement and do it in a Word document, use the character count and then copy and paste it into this box for your application, right? There's no specific question or prompt that you're answering, but the question being asked is basically like, why do you want to become a physician? And are you ready to become a physician, right? So you really want to, over the course of this document, right, demonstrate that you know what the position is like, that you're motivated to do it, and that you're committed to do it. You also want to go over what you've done that makes you qualified to do it, and as well as going over any experiences that are lending themselves to making you a unique physician, right? And I say unique, meaning like, what is your specific approach to medicine, right? Who are the people that you want to help? What do you think is the best way to do that, right? What kind of doctor do you want to be, right? Do you want to really focus on this kind of treatment? Do you really want to do, this kind of method of patient care or whatever, right? As deeply and specifically as you can answer those questions, the better, right? Because again, they're really looking for knowledge of the field, commitment to the field, motivation to do it, and of course, those skills. Okay. However, there is also room to describe your work and activities, right? So as we're kind of talking about these two sections of your application, it is a good idea to kind of be thinking about this beforehand, because we do want to make sure that we are acknowledging all the experiences that are really important. But know that we might be doing it in different parts of the application, right? So what are the stories and experiences that are going to be really great for your personal statement versus your interview versus this section, right? And we want to show kind of breadth and depth, right? We want to show that you have a wide experience, right? So you didn't just shadow neurologists and only talk to neurologists and neurology nurses, right? You shadowed a neurologist. You also shadowed an anesthesiologist, and you also shadowed like a family med doctor, right? You want to show that you've done, kind of exploring in this field. And again, like I said, that you have knowledge of this field and specific knowledge of what you want to do, right? So for AMCAS, you have about 700 characters to describe each experience, and there are 15, kind of slots. You are going to mark 3 as most meaningful, and then you get an additional character space to talk more about those experiences, right? You can also include projected experiences and anticipated hours, right? So like I said, there are some parts of your application that you absolutely need to have done before you get started on doing it, right? And there are some things that can be done as you're completing it or noted that you will be completing it in the future, right? So for example, coursework, and also these projected experiences. For ACCOMAS, the character count is a little bit different. You've got 600 characters for each experience. They have kind of 6 different experience types that you're going to use to kind of categorize them. But you can list an unlimited amount of experiences. Anything within the past 10 years is, fair game. But you can't list projected ones for ACCOMAS, right? And it has a separate section for honors and awards and scholarships and things like that, right? So there are a couple of subtle differences to these two applications. If you're doing both, just make sure that you're paying attention to which one you're working on at which time, so you know how much room you have to talk about these experiences. It might be really helpful, again, to start working on your experiences before your personal statement or vice versa, right? You want to do these at kind of around the same time, like I said, to make sure that you're deciding where to kind of spend your time and energy talking about these experiences. This also might be really good stuff to send to your letter of recommendation writers, right? To kind of get to know you. Okay, I'm going to pause a second and take this question. For AMCAS, if I did an activity in high school and I'm continuing it in college, can I count the hours from both high school and college? I would say yes. Yeah. Because you do want to demonstrate that it is kind of that long-term relationship, right? That you've spent a long time doing it. So I would agree, which brings us to the next point. You want to keep track of how much time you're spending doing these experiences and activities. You also want to keep track of your responsibilities, any accomplishments that happened, right? If you got a certificate, if you got an award, if you got a promotion or whatever, right? You also want to think about the impact that you made, the qualities or skills that you practice, right? Whether they're kind of soft skills like interpersonal communication and teamwork, or if they're harder skills like you literally learned how to, draw blood or whatever, right? And of course, throughout all of these things for both your personal statement and your activities descriptions, we want to be paying attention to highlighting the way that these things are demonstrating that you are exhibiting those medical school core competencies, right? That's part of holistic review. They're really looking for these competencies, not a checklist. So we really want to be clear in how we describe these activities so that they know that you're showing these competencies.
Yeah, and I just want to add a little bit to that. So for AMCAS, you can put in your projected experiences, but that's only if you have that position set in place. So if you hope to work as a medical assistant, but you haven't landed a position, you can't list that on your application, but you can if you have that set up for you to start that job in July. Okay. If you started a position after you submitted that primary application and you wish you could have included that in your primary application, that is okay. You still have secondaries where you can input some of those experiences that you're gaining from that work into your application. You'll have an opportunity to talk about it in your interview, And you can even send letters to specific programs and update them on additional experiences that you have gained within that time that you submitted that primary application to when you're sending that email. The other thing I wanted to mention is about the 3 most meaningful. It's important that you're not repeating what you're communicating in your personal statement to what you're saying in those 3 most meaningful. So personal statement, let's say you're talking about your ability to empathize, connect with patients, and your teamwork skills. And maybe in your work and activity section, you're talking about your other skills, your ability to collaborate, and all of those other core competencies. So at the end of the application, they're going to get a well-rounded picture of who you are as an applicant and get a better sense of all of the skills that you've had. And the way you write those work and activity descriptions, it's not like a job application where you're like, these are my responsibilities. You're actually writing a quality 700-character paragraph. So make sure that you're getting feedback on those as well. This is me. All right. So you can submit your primary application without having MCAT scores in the system. You just have to feel okay with whatever score you get and roll with that for your application. Most people want to see their scores and solidify their list of schools before submitting their primary application. So either or would be fine. We would be happy to talk to you about the pros and cons there at a more one-on-one level as well. Another strategy around this is that you can submit your primary application, which includes submitting it to 1 medical school, plus that primary application fee. And then you can always go back to your primary application and add more schools. So that's going to allow you to submit that primary application and get it in line for verification as you wait to get that score back. And then once that score is in the system, it will be automatically uploaded into AMCAS. For ACCOMAS, it's not automatically uploaded. So when you go to take the MCAT, you're going to want to request that it's going to be sent to ACCOMAS, and then ACCOMAS will be responsible for connecting that to your primary application. All right. And if you're thinking about MCAT test prep and planning to apply within a couple years, there is an MCAT test prep workshop at the University of Oregon through the Tutoring and Academic Engagement Center. It's offered every winter quarter. It's not a course that you receive credit for, and it's something that you can engage with other peers if you like working within a group. There are other test prep resources. We have an Excel sheet in our Canvas site if you want to check that out. It's a list of different low cost, no cost, and then costly MCAT prep resources. There's also a document in there that can help you develop how to study or how to develop your study plan for the MCAT, because you want to do the prepping for the prepping. It takes some time to do that. So there is that option. Transitioning to talk about the preview exam. I know that this is pretty new to many folks. Some heard a little bit about it, but are not exactly sure what it's about. Other folks haven't heard about it at all. It's new. So the preview was a pilot program for 3 years, and then last year they officially provided all of the to incorporate this exam into their admissions process. So only a small number of schools opted into that, but that means that you need to check your list of schools to see if they require the preview exam. And if they do, you need to develop a plan on when you're going to take that. So what is the exam? So preview professional readiness exam. It essentially presents hypothetical scenarios that are either ethical-based scenarios or environmental, like situational-based. And then it gives you 5 different ways in which you could respond to that situation. And then you're going to rate that either as very ineffective all the way up to very effective. And then you'll get a score based off of that. They evaluate it based off of those medical school core competencies, such as interpersonal skills, cultural awareness, empathy and compassion. So they're really wanting to get a sense of who you are as a person through this exam. And so when to take the exam, I would recommend taking it sometime between March through July. There are test dates that are available between March and September, but some medical schools are using this exam as a preliminary holistic review of you as an applicant before they decide they want to invite you in for an interview. So in order for it to not impact your application timeline, remember medical school's rolling admissions, you want to take it early. So as soon as you finish taking the MCAT, you might want to start thinking about this exam and a timeline for that. So sometime between March through July, I would say would be the safe zone there. It used to be that you're only allowed to take it one time in an application cycle. That's changed for this upcoming cycle. You're going to be allowed to take it 2 times. And then where to take the exam, it's the location of your choice. You can take it at home, in another setting. There's a live remote human proctoring, so be sure you have a professional background, be sure you have good internet connection, and that there isn't any distractions in the setting that you're going to be taking it in. All right, Casper exam is another exam you may need to take. So this is a situational judgment test. So this helps program have a better understanding of your behavioral tendencies, similar to that preview exam. You are presented with ethical and situational based questions. You are essentially being evaluated on those medical school core competencies. I think the only difference with the Casper exam is that it is open-ended questions. So you are verbally responding to a prompt or typing it out in a certain period of time. So treat it like an interview. You want to prepare for interviews, so you want to prepare for the Casper exam as well. And if it's required by any of the programs you're applying to, feel free to connect with us and we can provide you some support around that. We can do like a mock interview or identify some resources for you so that you can prepare at home. All right, some tips would be to familiarize yourself with the structure of the exam, read about the check-in process, what is the length of the exam, how much time do you spend per scenario. In addition to that, practice some sample questions. There are some great sample questions online for preview under the AAMC website. And then there's some good information out there on Casper as well. You can also practice MMI style interview questions, especially if you're going to be taking that Casper exam because they're open-ended questions. So MMI stands for multiple mini interviews. It's a certain style of interviewing that many medical programs use. We do have, are planning to do a interview overview workshop in the spring term if you want to learn more about that. But if you're planning to take the Casper exam, you can Google MMI questions and see what examples pop up and kind of practice those as well. And then there's some pretty good resources online to kind of practice your typing as well and brush up on that. All right, and Amanda.
Ooh, excuse me. Okay, so back to letters of rec. So letters of rec are tricky. So you do not need to have them submitted before your application can move forward. But of course, your application needs them in order to be accepted, right? So that's just to say that if you've got a letter writer who hasn't submitted their letter yet and you're ready to turn in your application, go ahead and turn it in. Reach out to that letter writer, right? If they're not being responsive, get an appointment with us ASAP, because then we're going to need to discuss some like triage situations, okay? So let's talk about the overall kind of letter situation here at UO. So you may have heard about committee letters or letter packets. Here at UO, we do not do that. You will submit individual letters of recommendation from individual faculty members or professionals or PIs or whatever, right? Make sure that you're doing the research and looking at each school's minimum requirements for these LORs, right? Sometimes they want you to have 2 science faculty, 1 non-science faculty, and then 1 from the professional world, either your boss or a physician, right? Sometimes they might want just 2 academic letters and then 1 professional one, right? Sometimes they'll say there is no kind of minimum. It's a free-for-all, any combination, right? So you just want to make sure that you know which programs have specific letters of recommendation requirements, right? You might also see them called letters of evaluation. When you make that request, right, it's usually a kind of a request. You're going to enter the name of the person that you are requesting. You're going to enter their email. They're going to get a link from AMCAS or ACCOMAS with like a kind of link to upload their letter, right? For med school, you can also choose to use the service Interfolio, which will store your letters of recommendation. So you can get them right now and then kind of have them like locked and loaded and ready to go if you do decide to take like a true gap year or something like that, right? So that's also an option. So for AMCAS, you can add up to 15 letters of recommendation. Please do not do 15. Generally, the common number is going to be anywhere from like 3 to 5, right? 4 is pretty normal. You can designate letters of recommendation to specific schools, right? So for example, if one of your letter writers is an alumni of a particular program and you really, really want them to write, a particular letter for that program, that's perfect. Make sure that you send it only to that program and you're going to have them write something different for other programs or whatever, right? You can make that designation within the portal. For ACCOMAS, you can have up to 6 letters of evaluation. You cannot have that kind of specificity that I just talked about. So you can't send a specific letter of evaluation to, Stanford versus like OHSU, right? And they may require a letter of evaluation from a DO. Many schools heavily prefer letters of recommendations from DOs for DO programs. So again, make sure that you're doing your research and knowing exactly what your program wants you to do. Okay, so we're going to select schools, right? You're going to add medical schools and these are the schools that you're adding to have your materials sent to them, right? As Sonia said, there is a way to do it where you are doing your application and only sending it to one school to get your whole application verified. And then you're going to go back and add more schools, or you can add all of the schools from the beginning, right? And, I think this is pretty standard for a lot of applications. There's going to be a drop-down menu. You're probably going to have to search by like location, or you're going to have to start typing in the university name, and it'll pop up and you'll select it, et cetera, et cetera. You're also going to select what kind of programs you want to apply to, right? So be aware here that if you're doing like MD, PhD, right? This would be the moment where you select that, and then it might populate additional application materials for you, right? So if you're applying to MD, PhD programs, right, they might want you to write a slightly different kind of personal statement for the PhD portion of it, right? So just be aware of those options as you go through these screens. Okay, so again, do your research, right? All medical schools are unique and you should really take the time to like learn about the program to determine if the program is a good fit for you and your particular interests. So students are always asking me what they can do to be competitive. And one of the things that I repeat over and over again is that you really don't want to think of yourself as competing with your fellow students, right? Like that kind of thinking just kind of drives you nuts. You're always going to be measuring yourself up to this like invisible person that you've never met and you don't really know, who is a kind of combination of everyone you've ever met and already know, right? And it's all your worst fears. It's bad thinking, right? Instead, what you should be thinking about is what are the schools that I most want to go to, and how can I make sure that I'm a good fit for those programs, right? So what kind of qualities are they looking for? What kind of physicians do they want to turn out? How can I tailor my experiences and the work that I'm doing and my shadowing to kind of show them that I'm that kind of candidate, right? And like I said, it's going to be different from program to program, right? So we've got a quote here on the screen. If you've seen one medical school, then you've seen one medical school, right? Each school is going to be pretty idiosyncratic. Some of the things that you want to pay attention to, right, are the average or the range of MCAT scores that the school is looking at, right? If they've got a minimum MCAT score and you don't meet it, please do not throw away your like $150 or $60, $75, right, to do an application when they're not going to consider you, right? Same thing for things like your average and the range of GPAs that they're looking at, right? Again, if you've got a drastic difference, that can be trouble, right? However, if you're pretty close, you could still be considered. That's the point of holistic review, right? So if, again, you just want to make sure that they don't have like a hard cutoff or requirement, right? You also want to look at in-state versus out-of-state acceptance rates, right? We've already talked a little bit about Texas, right? UW is another example where they really heavily favor Washington and Alaska residents, right? And if you're not one of those, it's going to be pretty hard for you to get in. Do you want to spend the application fee on that, right? Does it make sense to maybe put that towards a different application to a school where you're more likely to get in, right? So the first thing that you want to be looking at is you want to be looking at those kinds of hard and fast requirements, right? Deciding whether or not you meet those minimum requirements or whether it makes sense to kind of apply to that school, right? You want to have a varied number of schools to apply to, right? Average number is kind of 15 if you're planning to cast a wide net. It is like a job, right? The more you apply to, the more chances that you have to be accepted. So think about that. But it is, of course, very expensive to apply, and you don't, want to be throwing away your money. Is the in-state related to where you attend school, where you graduated high school, or where your parents live? It's going to be based on your residency. So most likely where your parents live, right? Now, like I said, there might be some ways around that, right? So for example, some states might count residency a little bit differently, or some schools might count residency a little bit differently. And they might say, if you've spent like 5 years doing your undergrad in that state, you can be considered a resident, for example. So that's, again, going to be some specific research that we'll have to do. What do you consider a good plus or minus number for the GPA and MCAT scores? For example, does it make sense for a person with a 3.7 to apply to a school that has an average of 3.9? 3.7 and 3.9, that's close enough where I think that you could get away with it. But again, it's going to depend on the mission of that program. And also, of course, the other thing, right? So for example, if that's your GPA, but you've got like a super stellar MCAT score, totally, I would say apply, right? If both your GPA and your MCAT score are a little bit on the lower end, but you have so many like really great like healthcare related experience to talk about, I would say, sure, go ahead. However, if that's your GPA and you got like a really bad MCAT score and you didn't have time to retake it, I would say do not apply, right? If you've got, that GPA, but you don't really have a lot of shadowing experiences or a lot of volunteer hours, I would say, I think you're better off safer not applying. Because your chances of getting into med school do go down with every kind of reapplication. It's totally normal to apply like 2 times, right? 3 times is also kind of okay, but you're pushing it really after that, right? After the 3rd time, I would say that your chances of getting in become really, really low because they want to know what's different about your application every time you reapply. So we want to apply to these schools when you feel very confident in your application. You don't really want it to be a kind of question. All right, are medical schools taking legacy into account? They do. It's hard to say to what degree. Of course, they don't want to answer that either. And, I think you guys are old enough to know that sometimes they can also be very shady about how they treat legacy students, right? So they're never really going to have a good upfront answer about how much that factors into admissions. It could be a program where it factors a lot into admissions. It could be a program where they're like actively trying to combat legacy, admissions, right? You never really know. Again, this is something that you might want to ask an admissions representative about. And again, doing the research, right? If this is a school that is really interested in having a really large and diverse crowd of students, yeah, right. They're not going to want to admit a bunch of legacies because then they're going to end up with the same kind of student, right? So, it's not a bad thing or a good thing objectively, right? If you are a legacy, it can really go either way for you. Again, the best thing to do would be to contact that admissions representative and see. Does chances of getting into a specific school go down if you apply once and don't get in and apply the next year? It would depend. I say applying the next year again is pretty normal, right? Like that does happen and it happens all the time. But again, you really want your application to be significantly different. So you really want to show them that you really did things differently in that full year between applying, right? If you can do that, then I would not say that your chances go down, right? I would say that your chances might even go up a little bit because you spent that year really trying to get your hands on those kinds of quality experiences and really making up for the kinds of weaknesses in your earlier application, right? If you're not doing that over the time, that you've spent reapplying, right? If nothing really has changed about your application, then yes, your chances will go down because again, they just won't be seeing that kind of progression, right? What reason would they have to say yes at that point if your application is not different, right? So again, that's going to be specific to everyone's individual situation. There is no one answer. Other questions? Okay, feel free to keep them coming. So like I said, you want to do your research on the programs. And again, you want to think about these other factors. So you want to think about the program mission. Are they research-based? Are they really big on volunteerism? Are they really emphasizing patient care and clinical hands-on experience, right? So you kind of want to think about the structure of the program, right? When do they do classes versus when do they introduce clinical work? Some programs will do 2 years of classes and then 1 year of kind of mixed clinical and classwork. Some programs might do 3 years or 4 years of total classwork and then another, couple of years of clinicals, right? The way these programs organize themselves can be different and they can be, not appropriate for your type of learning style, right? So you want to go somewhere where you want to be successful, right? Think about whether it's a public school or a private school, right? Think about costs, think about financial aid, right? Think about their application data, right? How many applicants do they have? How do they feel about in-state versus out-of-state applicants, right? Do you see yourself living in that location, right? Think about the weather. Think about housing prices. Think about accessibility, right? If you don't have a car, you don't want to go to LA where everything you do is going to be oriented around driving. You know what I mean? If you are a big city person, I don't think you're going to thrive really well in like a Midwest small town and rural environment, right? So be mindful of your kind of lifestyle. Again, you want to set yourself up for success. You want to put yourself in a position where you're going to do the best, right? Okay, so some questions here that are not super related to this particular topic, so I think we'll save them for the end. But I would say that clinical work and non-clinical work, the line is like pretty clear. For clinical work, it's pretty much, I would say if you have to put on gloves in order to touch someone, it's a pretty good sign you're doing clinical work, right? If you're just like taking their name and their phone number and just talking to them, that's not going to count as clinical work, right? How do you craft a personal statement if you're not sure what you want to specialize in? That's a great question. We're going to answer that through the discussion and also through the personal statement workshop. So I'm actually going to put a hold on that one, if that's okay, Isabella, but know that it will get answered. Okay, so now that I've talked about all of these things that you want to research on, the next slide is going to talk a little bit about how to do that research. But Sonia looks like she has something to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to share a couple things. One of them is minimum qualifications for admissions. So many programs don't check minimum qualifications before sending you secondary. So I would encourage you to check for that before you decide to apply to that program, because if you pay for that program in your primary and then get a secondary, pay for it, and then realize, oh shoot, I don't meet their minimums, I'm not going to get an invitation. That's money going down the drain. And so that came to mind when I heard Amanda talk about in-state versus out-of-state acceptance. Washington is one of those states where they really want to prioritize residents from the state of Washington. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is MSAR. So MSAR is a tool that you can use to explore programs. It's MSAR. It's managed through the AEMC. It's something that you have to pay to get access to, but if you do decide to do that, I think it's like 20 something dollars. It has really great data in there, and it can help you. You can go in there and put in your MCAT score and your GPA, and it can populate programs in which you meet those averages. It doesn't tell you the range. So again, you want to move that a little bit to kind of get a range of programs in which you're still eligible for. It's a really great tool. It tells you the range in which people have matriculated into their class. And so that can give you some insights as to how holistic they might be in their admissions process. It gives you information about their mission and other just really great information. So that can help you narrow down your list. So highly recommend it. All right.
I'm sorry. Here it is.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I went ahead. So there's a whole slide on it. So this is what MSAR looks like. So as you can see on the left-hand side, there's that medium MCAT score. You can narrow down that to what your MCAT score is. If you scroll down a bit, it'll give you the option to do that for your GPA. All right, and then for ACCOMAS, there is a program that you can use to explore DO programs. So be sure to check that out in our resources list. I did provide a link to that page.
Yeah, and I just want to say really quickly that you want to double check against the individual program websites, right? So this is really great for right now, but before you apply, just double check, because sometimes they'll update information on their website and it doesn't make it into these databases, right? It's rare, but it could happen. We don't want to be in that position. Another way to discover whether or not you would be a great fit for these programs is to, again, attend in-person and virtual info sessions and medical school fairs, talk to admissions reps, ask them what they're looking for, ask them who their ideal candidate is, right? We have the Health Graduate School Fair that happens every spring quarter here at UO. You can also subscribe to program newsletters if they have one, attend, again, like I said, open houses or any kind of prospective student gatherings that they have. Some schools will actually keep track of who's been going. And if they see that you're going and then they see your application in the mix, they're going to prefer you a little bit more. Some schools don't keep track, right? But either way, going to these things is a really great way to gather information. And again, also to ask those questions that, like, me and Sonia really just might not have the answer to. Like, sometimes we really can't tell you. It's going to be on that admissions team to answer that question, right? So those are really great options in order to decide whether or not these programs are right for you.
All right, the cost of the application. So the primary application for AMCAS, that costs $175 to send that primary application with one medical school. And then thereafter, any additional program that you add, that's $45. So if you're applying to 15 schools, multiply that by 45 by 50. ACCOMAS $198 for that primary application with one medical school, and then plus $55 for each additional school thereafter. And then the Texas Medical School does have a flat rate of $215. Additional costs that you can anticipate. So secondary fees, that ranges depending on the program. So it can be anywhere from $30 to $200. In-person interviews for those few programs that are still doing in-person interviews, you're going to have to think about the cost of flights, hotel, food, etc. So that can range anywhere from $600 to $5,000, depending on how many in-person interviews you have to do. The MCAT itself, that is $335 as of right now. MCAT prep resources can range anywhere from nothing to $2,000. And the CASPER exam, that is $85 plus for every school that you have to submit a score for, that's an additional $15. Preview 100, and then acceptance deposit as well in order to, if you get accepted into a program, you have to put down a deposit. So that can be anywhere from $100 and $2,000. So you're easily spending $3,000 plus in your medical school application, which can be pretty heavy. So I bring this to your awareness so that you can start thinking about a plan to pay for your application. There is some resources out there to kind of help alleviate some of that financial stressors. So there's the AMCAS Fee Assistance Program. I highly recommend checking out the eligibility requirements for this program and applying if you're eligible. So this is valid for 2 calendar years. So if you apply for this month of January, it will expire December 2025. So that's a good amount of time, and you can apply up to 5 times. Another thing to note is that for the application, they only require a US-based address. So that opens the opportunity if you identify as an international student or undocumented. Eligibility is based on family size and income. So check out the AAMC website to see if you're eligible. But as you can see, there are many wonderful benefits that you get out of this program. Everywhere from MCAT prep resources that are available through the AAMC. You get a reduced cost of the MCAT, free subscription to that MSAR website. If you are requesting to get accommodations for the MCAT, they need updated evaluation, psychoeducational and medical evaluation. So there's some financial assistance to that. And then the fee is waived for that primary application and up to 20 medical schools, which is pretty significant for that MD application, and then a free waiver for that preview exam. So really great resource. If you're thinking about how to pay for your time in medical school, there's also a website called AAMC First. If you want to check that out, there's lots of great articles in there that can kind of help you start thinking about your available options. We do get a lot of questions around that. So basically, when you get admitted into medical school, at that point, you can work with a financial aid advisor at that institution to talk about your financial aid package and resources available to you. But between now and then, you're kind of like in limbo as to what that financial plan is going to look like. But there are some really great resources out there to kind of get informed of what your options are. So check out AAMC First for that. And then just want to give a shout out to the healthcare related scholarships. Those are due April 1st. There are a few pre-medical scholarships. There's one pre-dental, and then there's the Margaret J. Wise that is family and healthcare related. So for folks in this room, the pre-med and that Margaret J. Wise scholarship would be a really great option unless you're graduating this year. But for juniors, freshmen and sophomores in the room, please consider applying. All right, so your application, I think I mentioned this a few times. It takes a few weeks for your application to be verified. So the earlier you apply, the earlier your application is going to get verified. So if you're applying sometime between the month of May through June, it's going to take about 2 weeks for your application to be verified versus the month of August. That's like the peak period of application, and it can take up to 6 weeks for your application to be verified. So with medical school being rolling admissions, that's why we're highly recommending that you apply as early as possible so that your application can be in that line for verification. So once you submit that primary application and it is in the works for it getting processed, so it'll be processed once they have received all of your official transcripts to either ACCOMAS or AMCAS, and your application will be verified your coursework will be verified. So they're going to go in, open up that official transcript, and they're going to verify that you inputted your academic history accurately. And they'll also calculate your GPA. So that includes your overall cumulative, science GPA, and then they break it down in a couple other ways. So your application, once it's verified, will be sent off to those medical schools. For AMCAS, that would be June 28th and after. And then ACCOMAS, that's pretty immediately. But there's that risk that your application will be undelivered and returned to you. Typically, that happens if you forget to add a class in that course academic history section, or maybe you put in a grade incorrectly, or maybe you repeated a course, but you didn't include that first attempt. So it's important to put in both of those attempts. So be sure that you are being as accurate as possible, especially in that academic history section. Please be sure you're reading the handbook and following the instructions there and watching those videos, because that's going to help reduce the chances of your application getting returned. Yes, you do have to input W's. So every course that you ever registered for and either have W, pass, no pass, graded, all of that's going to go in your application. So that's why it's important to request an official transcript for yourself so you can see exactly what they see and then put that into the centralized application portal. All right, and final nuances.
Yeah. So like I said, I've been alluding to this whole time, right? You don't have to have everything done all at once. We do want to be thinking about developing the application timeline so that you are keeping track of all the materials and submitting them when they need to be submitted, right? So you can submit your primary application without having all your letters of rec submitted or your MCAT and preview score submitted. However, you cannot add experiences once your application is submitted, and you cannot make edits to your personal statement anymore, right? So basically, you kind of want to think about what are the parts of the application that you are responsible for, and what are the parts that you are relying on other people to do, right? So you rely on the MCAT system to send your scores. You rely on your letters of recommendation writers to send in those letters of rec, right? When you are involving that kind of third party into it, there's a little bit more grace, right? They understand that professors are really bad at sending in letters of recommendation on time, and that they send them in late all the time. You know what I mean? So those things are okay. But if it's something that you are responsible for, right? So getting your transcripts sent, right? Entering your class, your courses, right? Entering your personal statement and your experiences. There's no room, there's no wiggle room on that. You've got to get those in for your application to be even considered, right? So as I said, letters of rec are complicated. What do you do if somebody ghosts you? They said they were going to write a letter of rec. You've been, trying to email them. You've submitted your primary application, but they haven't submitted a letter yet. Well, one, make an appointment with us. Let's talk about it. Let's develop a plan. But you can add more letter of rec writers to your application, right? So if somebody flakes out on you, there is a chance for you to add somebody else to kind of replace them and take their place, right? You can apply to more programs if you want. So if you decide sort of, 75% way through your list that you actually want to add like 3 more programs, you can still do that. Again, as long as those individual program deadlines haven't passed, right? You can also make changes to your ID number, your name, your contact information, right? If you move, you can update your address, right? When you can change the day that you take your MCAT so that they know when the scores are going to come in, right? And you can also make changes to whether or not you want us to be us pre-health advisors to be able to view your application, right? So let me see. Oh, other nuances. So for AMCAS, if you have a letter of rec writer who hasn't submitted their letter, you can't delete them. You're just going to mark it as no longer being sent, right? And ACCOMAS allows you to kind of make updates to your course selections and those parts of your application through particular times of the year. So for example, from September 1st to October 13th, right? That's the time when you're maybe uploading all of the final prereq courses that you just finished in the spring or whatever, right? So you have those options for ACCOMAS. Okay, so what do you need to work on? What are you doing, right? So you kind of want to take this in stages, right? So right now you kind of just want to like make a plan, right? When are you going to make those requests? Who are you going to ask for letters of recommendation? When are you going to take the MCAT, the CAS for the preview? When are you going to study for those things, right? When are you going to start writing your personal statement? When are you going to start writing, the other paper parts of your application, right? Your activity descriptions, all of those kinds of things. When are you going to work on your CV and your resume? And when are you going to come up with your, final school list, right? You got to have all of that done. And once you have that done, I think you're pretty much ready to apply. Hopefully by then it's around May and you're ready to send those letter of request links to your writers. You're ready to get your official transcripts sent to these centralized application services. You're ready to do, your course classification and all the, biographical parts of your application. And you are, if you're doing the ACCOMAS, right, you're completing your entering of all the prerequisite courses that you're taking, right? Okay, and then what do you do after that kind of initial application has been sent in? Well, as we've been talking about, you're probably going to get secondary essay questions sent to you. You're going to want to prepare for interviews. And of course, you want to be on your email. Check your spam folder, right? Check it every day. Make sure you're not missing any requests. Sometimes they might email you and say, hey, something funky went through with your application. We actually didn't get this part. Can you resend it, right? You want to make sure that you are on top of any, sort of additional info requests like that. Now, as for your essays, both your secondary essays, your activity descriptions, and your personal statement, we at Tykeson offer 1 hour appointments for that, right? And we also offer 1 hour appointments for mock interviews as well in both the traditional format and the MMI format. So feel free to schedule appointments with us to actually get, our eyes on your materials and get some real, concrete practice in. All right. And then, of course, we've been alluding it to this whole time, but we've got a pre-health advising Canvas. Chances are you're probably in it already. We added a whole bunch of students when we kind of debuted it this quarter. If you open up Canvas and you see that your left-hand menu is blue, on that blue sidebar, you're going to see a set of arrows underneath your account profile button, right? You're going to click those arrows. It's going to change that sidebar into yellow, and chances are the pre-health advising Canvas will pop up. If you don't see it there, you can use this QR code to be added to a list, and we'll be adding people, on kind of like a weekly basis throughout the quarter, right? The Canvas is where we are putting, again, all of our materials. Sonia mentioned that there are certain MCAT resource lists, that there are templates. We've talked about where this recording is going to live, right? It's all going to be through the Canvas. The Canvas is organized by profession and by, explore, plan, prepare, apply. You all should be pretty familiar with that kind of format by now, right? So I just suggest clicking around and taking a look at what we've got up there. And then, of course, many people have been putting together some personal statement questions, some letters of rec, specific questions. If I didn't answer them today, there's a very, very, very high chance that I'm going to answer them through those workshops, right? So in addition to the kind of application deep dive workshops, we've got the dental school, the PA school, PT and AT coming up. On February 13th, we have the letters of recommendation overview. And on the 15th, we've got the personal statement deep dive, right? They're going to be on Zoom, just like this one. You can grab the QR code there at the bottom to register for those as well. Whew, all right. It was a lot, I know. And we're a little bit over time. Thank you for that. If you've got questions, feel free to ask them now. We can definitely hang behind and answer them. But of course, like I said, we are going to be starting that discussion board on Canvas where we're going to be posting your questions and the answers to that, right? We're also going to be posting